The first light of dawn painted the Arizona desert in shades of amber and gold as Elena Vasquez arrived at Hammond Industries, a sprawling manufacturing complex that produced precision parts for aerospace companies. Her weathered pickup truck coughed to a stop in the employee parking lot, joining dozens of other vehicles that belonged to the night shift workers heading home and the day shift just beginning. Elena pulled her tool bag from the truck bed, the weight familiar after 3 years of the same routine. At 41, she moved with the efficient grace of someone who had learned to conserve energy for the tasks that mattered. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her coveralls bore the logos of various tool manufacturers, the uniform of someone invisible to most people, but essential to everything that worked. The manufacturing floor hummed with activity as massive CNC machines carved aluminum and titanium into components that would eventually find their way into commercial aircraft, satellites, and military hardware. Elena made her way to her workstation in the maintenance bay, where broken machines waited for her attention like patients in a hospital ward. "Morning, Elena," called Marcus Chen, the floor supervisor, as he approached with his daily clipboard of concerns. "We've got the big Haas mill acting up again. Third time this month. Johnson thinks it needs a complete spindle replacement, but corporate's pushing back on the cost." Elena set down her coffee and pulled on her safety glasses. "Let me take a look first. Sometimes what sounds like a spindle problem is actually something simpler." She approached the massive machine with the methodical patience that had made her indispensable to Hammond Industries. The mill was worth more than most people's houses, a precision instrument capable of cutting metal to tolerances measured in fractions of human hair width. But like all complex machines, it was only as good as the person who understood its language. Elena placed her hands on the machine's frame, feeling for vibrations that shouldn't be there. She listened to the spindle motor, her trained ear picking up subtle variations in pitch and rhythm that spoke volumes about internal condition. Her eyes scanned control panels and readouts, looking for patterns that others might miss. "The spindle's fine," she announced after 20 minutes of investigation. "But you've got a coolant flow problem that's causing thermal expansion in the workpiece. See this error code? It's intermittent, because the problem only shows up when the ambient temperature hits exactly 78 degrees. The machine's trying to compensate, but the coolant system can't keep up." Marcus looked skeptical. "Johnson's been working on these machines for 15 years. He's pretty sure about the spindle." Elena pulled out her phone and showed him the diagnostic data she'd gathered. The spindle-bearing temperatures are all within normal range. But look at this coolant flow meter reading. It's dropping by 12% every time the HVAC cycles off. There's probably a clog in line 3, maybe some debris from last month's filter change. She was right, of course. Elena was always right about machines. What Marcus and the other supervisors didn't know was that her understanding came from more than just 3 years of factory experience. Elena Vasquez had once been doctor. Elena Vasquez, one of the world's leading experts in aerospace propulsion systems, a woman who had designed engines that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Before Hammond Industries, before the anonymity of coveralls and diagnostic computers, Elena had stood in mission control rooms watching rockets she'd helped design carry human dreams into space. She'd held security clearances that opened doors to the most classified projects in American aerospace. Her engines had powered satellites that kept the nation safe and rovers that explored distant worlds. But that was before the Prometheus incident, before her life's work became a weapon, before she learned that the engines she'd designed to reach for the stars could also rain death from the sky. The memory hit her as it always did, without warning. Dr. Martinez's voice echoing through the classified briefing room. "The modifications you made to the Prometheus engine have been adapted for the Scythe missile system. 12 prototypes deployed. Target elimination efficiency up 340%. Elena had stared at the presentation slides showing her propulsion designs integrated into weapons of war. The same innovations that had powered peaceful scientific missions were now being used to kill people in conflicts she barely understood. When she'd objected, when she'd demanded that her work be removed from military applications, she'd been told that national security requirements superseded her personal preferences. Elena? Marcus's voice pulled her back to the present. You okay? You looked like you were somewhere else for a minute. She blinked, focusing on the manufacturing floor around her. The CNC mill hummed contentedly now that she'd corrected the coolant flow issue. Workers moved efficiently between stations, producing parts that would eventually become aircraft engines. Civilian engines, she reminded herself, not weapons. Just thinking through the repair procedure, she replied smoothly. I'll need about 2 hours to flush the coolant system and replace the filter. Should have her running like new by lunch. Marcus nodded and moved on to other concerns, leaving Elena alone with the machine and her memories. This was her life now, fixing other people's creations, staying invisible, trying to forget that she'd once reached for the stars and found only darkness waiting there. She pulled out her tools and began the careful process of system maintenance, her hands moving with practiced precision while her mind remained carefully blank. It was easier that way, safer. The world didn't need Dr. Elena Vasquez anymore, and she'd made peace with that fact. Or so she told herself every morning as she clocked in for another day of voluntary exile. The coolant system repair took exactly 2 hours, just as Elena had predicted. As she ran the final diagnostic tests, confirming that all parameters were back within normal range, she allowed herself a moment of professional satisfaction. The mill would run smoothly for months now, producing the precision components that kept aircraft safe and functional. Nice work, said a voice behind her. Elena turned to see David Kim, one of the newer engineers, watching her with obvious admiration. Fresh out of college with a mechanical engineering degree, David reminded Elena of herself 20 years ago, eager, brilliant, and convinced that technology could solve any problem. Just routine maintenance, Elena replied, wiping her hands on a shop rag. Machine's been trying to tell us what was wrong for weeks. We just needed to listen. David stepped closer, examining the diagnostic readouts on Elena's tablet. How did you know it was a coolant flow issue? The error codes all pointed to spindle problems. Elena hesitated. The honest answer involved years of experience with far more complex systems, theoretical knowledge of thermodynamics and materials science that went well beyond what a factory maintenance worker was expected to possess. Instead, she offered a simpler truth. Machines don't lie, but they don't always speak clearly either. You have to learn their language, understand how all the systems interact. This mill is trying to maintain precision while dealing with thermal variations. When the coolant can't keep up, everything else starts to drift out of tolerance. David nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. I've been trying to figure out why some of our aerospace contracts have such tight specifications. Like, we're making parts for satellite propulsion systems that have tolerances smaller than anything I studied in school. Elena felt her pulse quicken at the mention of satellite propulsion, but kept her expression neutral. Different applications have different requirements. Space is an unforgiving environment. Have you ever worked on space stuff before? David asked with the curiosity of someone who'd grown up dreaming of rockets and distant planets. You seem to understand these systems better than most of the engineers I know. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Elena could deflect it easily, change the subject, maintain the careful boundaries she'd constructed around her past. But something in David's eager expression reminded her of late nights in university labs, of the pure joy of discovery that had once driven her to push the boundaries of human knowledge. I used to work in aerospace, she said carefully. Different life, different priorities. Before David could ask follow-up questions, the factory's PA system crackled to life. All department heads to conference room A. All department heads to conference room A immediately. The announcement carried an edge of urgency that made workers pause at their stations. In Elena's experience, emergency meetings usually meant bad news: contract cancellations, layoffs, or safety incidents that would bring regulatory scrutiny. Marcus appeared at Elena's workstation, his face tight with concern. "Elena, I need you to cover the floor for a few minutes. Keep an eye on the big orders coming through. If anything breaks down, do what you can to keep production moving." She nodded, accepting the temporary responsibility. As the supervisors and department heads filed toward the administrative offices, Elena found herself alone with the machines and her thoughts. The manufacturing floor felt different without its usual hierarchy, more honest somehow. These machines didn't care about corporate politics or classified projects. They simply did what they were designed to do, as long as someone understood how to maintain them properly. 20 minutes later, Marcus returned, looking like a man who'd aged several years in a single conversation. His usual efficient demeanor had been replaced by barely controlled stress as he gathered the floor workers around the main workstation. "Everybody listen up," he announced, his voice carrying across the factory floor. "I just got out of a meeting with corporate. We've been selected for a major new contract, something big enough to keep this facility running for the next 5 years. A murmur of relief rippled through the gathered workers. In an industry where contracts could vanish overnight, long-term security was precious as gold. Marcus held up his hand for silence. The good news is job security and overtime opportunities. The challenging news is that this contract involves classified work, government aerospace applications with security requirements that are going to change how we operate." Elena felt ice forming in her stomach. Classified aerospace work, government contracts, the very world she'd walked away from was reaching out to reclaim her. "Starting Monday," Marcus continued, "we'll have federal security personnel on site conducting background checks on all employees. Anyone working on the classified components will need security clearance. The process takes time, so in the meantime, we'll be compartmentalizing work areas." David raised his hand. "What kind of aerospace applications? Commercial satellites or military stuff?" Marcus's expression grew carefully neutral. "The client specifications are classified, but I can tell you it involves propulsion systems for what they're calling strategic defense applications. Multiple prototypes, extensive testing requirements, and quality standards that exceed anything we've worked on before." Elena's hands began to tremble slightly as the implications sank in. Strategic defense applications was military code for weapons systems. Her sanctuary, her place of peaceful exile, was about to become part of the same machine she'd fled years ago. "Questions?" Marcus asked, scanning the assembled faces. Elena found her voice, though it came out steadier than she felt. "What happens to employees who don't qualify for security clearance?" "Good question. Corporate says they'll try to transfer people to other contracts, but honestly, this is going to be our primary work for the foreseeable future. Anyone who can't get cleared will probably be looking at layoffs." The meeting broke up with workers discussing the implications in worried clusters. Elena returned to her workstation, mechanically organizing tools while her mind raced through possibilities. She could quit before the background checks revealed her identity, but 3 years of steady employment had allowed her to buy a small house, to build something resembling a normal life. Starting over at 41, with a resume gap that couldn't be explained, would be nearly impossible. Worse, she knew what strategic defense applications meant. Somewhere in Washington, military planners were looking at foreign threats and deciding they needed better ways to eliminate them. The propulsion systems they'd be building here would eventually power weapons designed to kill people Elena would never meet, in conflicts she barely understood. David appeared at her workstation as she was preparing to leave for the day. "Elena, can I ask you something? That aerospace work you used to do, was it anything like what we'll be working on here?" Elena met his eyes, seeing her younger self reflected in his curiosity and ambition. For a moment, she considered telling him everything. About Dr. Elena Vasquez, about engines that could reach escape velocity, about the Prometheus project and how innovation could be corrupted into instruments of death. Instead, she offered a warning disguised as advice. "David, when you're working on projects like this, remember that your designs don't stay on paper. They become real things in the real world. Make sure you can live with where they end up." He looked puzzled by the cryptic response, but Elena was already walking toward the exit. Outside, the Arizona sun was setting behind distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of red that reminded her of rocket exhaust and things that burned too bright. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her sister Maria in California. "How's the quiet life treating you? Still happy you left all that rocket science behind?" Elena stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "It's about to get complicated." As she drove home through the desert evening, Elena tried to convince herself that she could navigate the coming changes. Keep her head down, avoid the classified work, maybe transfer to a different department. But deep in her heart, she knew the truth. The past was catching up with her, and this time there might be nowhere left to run. Elena's house sat on 2 acres of desert scrub outside Phoenix, far enough from the city to see stars at night, but close enough to civilization that delivery trucks could find her. She'd bought it with cash 3 years ago, a foreclosure special that required months of work to make habitable. The previous owners had abandoned it to the bank when the local mining company closed, leaving behind a structure that was sound but neglected. She'd spent evenings and weekends rebuilding the place herself, learning plumbing and electrical work with the same methodical approach she'd once applied to rocket engine design. The house had become her project, her anchor to a life that existed in the present tense rather than the dangerous territory of memory. The workshop behind the house was Elena's true sanctuary. Built into what had once been a 3-car garage, it contained workbenches, diagnostic equipment, and tools that could handle everything from small engine repair to precision metalwork. Her neighbors assumed she did freelance mechanical work, and Elena encouraged that assumption. It was simpler than explaining that she rebuilt machines to keep her hands busy and her mind quiet. But tonight, as she sat at her kitchen table with security clearance paperwork spread before her, the workshop felt like a monument to wasted potential. SF-86 forms, character references, financial disclosures, all the bureaucratic machinery required to let her touch classified projects again. She could fill them out truthfully and watch her carefully constructed new identity crumble. Or she could lie, commit a federal crime, and hope that 3 years of deliberate obscurity had buried Dr. Elena Vasquez deep enough to avoid discovery. The background check would be thorough. FBI agents would interview former colleagues, examine financial records, verify every address and employer she'd listed for the past 15 years. They'd discover the gap where Dr. Elena Vasquez had vanished, and Elena Vasquez, the factory worker, had appeared. Questions would be asked. Lies would be exposed. Elena's laptop sat open beside the paperwork, cursor blinking in an empty email draft. She'd started and deleted a dozen resignation letters, each one inadequate to explain why she needed to walk away from steady employment without providing references or forwarding addresses. Her phone rang, startling her from the paralysis of indecision. The caller ID showed David Kim's number. "Elena, sorry to bother you at home. I got your number from Marcus. I hope that's okay." "What's up, David?" She tried to keep her voice neutral, though her pulse had quickened. After-hours calls from coworkers usually meant emergencies. I've been thinking about what you said today, about designs becoming real things. I did some research on the company that's giving us this contract. Meridian Defense Systems. They specialize in what they call kinetic interdiction platforms and precision engagement systems. Elena closed her eyes. Kinetic interdiction platforms, military euphemisms for missiles, precision engagement systems, smart bombs. David had stumbled across the truth that would destroy his idealism, just as it had destroyed hers. That's military contractor language for weapons, she said quietly. Yeah, I figured that out. The thing is, I went into engineering because I wanted to build things that helped people. Bridges, clean energy systems, maybe spacecraft for exploration. I never thought about designing parts for weapons. Elena could hear the distress in his voice, the same crisis of conscience that had driven her from aerospace research. What are you going to do? I don't know. I need this job. I've got student loans and my mom's medical bills. But I keep thinking about those precision engagement systems and wondering who they're going to engage with. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, David wrestling with ethical implications, while Elena offered carefully neutral advice. Don't make hasty decisions. Consider all your options. Think about long-term consequences. The same advice she wished someone had given her before she'd designed engines that became instruments of war. After David hung up, Elena sat in her kitchen surrounded by half-completed forms and the weight of approaching revelation. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Defense Department announces $2.8 billion strategic defense initiative to counter emerging threats. She clicked the link, scanning the article with growing dread. Senator Patricia Hawkins, chair of the Armed Services Committee, was quoted extensively about the need for advanced kinetic systems to maintain American superiority in precision warfare. The article mentioned collaboration with private contractors to develop next-generation propulsion systems for strategic applications. Elena's hands began to shake as she recognized the language, the careful euphemisms that concealed weapons development behind patriotic rhetoric. Somewhere in Washington, military planners were implementing the same philosophy that had corrupted her Prometheus project: technological superiority through overwhelming force, innovation in service of elimination. She closed the laptop and walked to her workshop, seeking comfort in the familiar embrace of tools and machinery. Her current project sat on the main workbench, a 1967 Mustang engine that she was rebuilding for a neighbor. The 289 V8 was a simple, honest machine. Fuel, air, compression, ignition. No classified applications, no strategic implications, just mechanical principles applied to the peaceful purpose of transportation. Elena lost herself in the rhythmic work of engine assembly, her hands moving with practiced precision while her mind processed the day's revelations. Each component had a specific function, a designed purpose that couldn't be corrupted or repurposed. A camshaft opened valves, a piston compressed fuel mixture. A spark plug ignited combustion. Simple, direct, innocent. Unlike rocket engines that could power scientific missions or guided weapons with equal efficiency. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the caller ID showed a number she hadn't seen in 3 years, but recognized instantly. Dr. James Patterson, her former mentor, and the man who'd recruited her for the Prometheus project. Elena stared at the display for several rings before answering. Hello, James. Elena. His voice carried the weight of years and professional regret. I was hoping you might have time to talk. How did you get this number? I've been keeping tabs on you discreetly, making sure you were okay, that you'd found your footing after everything that happened. I know about the job at Hammond Industries. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert evening. What do you want? The Meridian contract. I know you've probably figured out what they're asking Hammond to build. Propulsion systems for the Scythe 2 program. Your designs, Elena. Improved versions of the Prometheus engines you created. The wrench in Elena's hand clattered to the workbench. My designs were classified. Sealed. You told me they'd been archived. Archived, yes. Forgotten, no. The current conflict situation has reactivated several dormant projects. Your propulsion innovations are exactly what we need to maintain strategic superiority. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the walls of her carefully constructed new life crumbling around her. I don't do that work anymore, James. I fix machines. I stay invisible. I don't build weapons. The world is changing, Elena. Foreign powers are developing capabilities that threaten American interests. We need every advantage we can get, and your engines could save American lives by ending conflicts quickly and decisively, by killing people more efficiently, by protecting our people more effectively. Elena, you're one of the most brilliant propulsion engineers who ever lived. The Meridian project needs your expertise, not just your old designs, but your active participation. I'm authorized to offer you full reinstatement at GS-15 level, research budget of $50 million, your choice of team and facility location. The offer hung in the desert air like a temptation. Full reinstatement would mean financial security, professional recognition, return to the cutting edge of aerospace research. She could have a real laboratory again, real challenges, real opportunities to push the boundaries of human knowledge. All she had to do was build better weapons. No, Elena said quietly. I'm not that person anymore. Elena, please, think about what you're saying. Your country needs you. The project needs you. These weapons could prevent wars by deterring aggression. The same argument you used for Prometheus. We were going to deter aggression by building engines that could deliver warheads with unprecedented precision. How did that work out, James? Patterson's voice hardened slightly. The applications of technology aren't the responsibility of the engineers who create it. We build tools. Politicians decide how to use them. That's exactly the kind of thinking that destroys people like us. We pretend our hands are clean because we only make the fire. We don't choose what burns. Elena ended the call before Patterson could respond, but she knew the conversation wasn't over. The government had found her, identified her value to their weapons programs, and made their initial offer. When gentle persuasion failed, they would try other approaches. She needed to disappear again, but this time would be harder. 3 years of employment history, property ownership, utility bills, and medical records had created a paper trail that couldn't be easily abandoned. More importantly, she'd grown tired of running. At some point, a person had to make a stand for what they believed in. Elena returned to the Mustang engine, finding peace in the simple act of assembling components that would power weekend drives and family vacations, rather than strategic elimination campaigns. As she worked, she made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't run this time. She wouldn't hide. And she definitely wouldn't build weapons. Instead, she would find a way to sabotage the Meridian project from within, ensuring that her designs never again became instruments of death. It was dangerous, probably illegal, and almost certainly futile. But it was also right. Elena arrived at Hammond Industries Monday morning to find the parking lot filled with unfamiliar vehicles, black SUVs with government plates and a mobile command unit that looked like it belonged at a federal crime scene. Security personnel in dark suits moved efficiently around the facility, checking credentials and establishing perimeters that hadn't existed Friday afternoon. The transformation was jarring. What had been a relaxed manufacturing environment where workers joked across production lines and supervisors knew everyone by name had become something resembling a military installation. Badge scanners had appeared overnight at every entrance. Security cameras tracked movement through areas that had previously operated on trust and mutual respect. "Welcome to the new normal," Marcus Chen said grimly as Elena approached the main entrance. His usual good humor had been replaced by the exhausted expression of someone who'd spent the weekend in crisis management mode. "Corporate security briefing at 8 a.m., mandatory for all personnel assigned to the Meridian contract." Elena nodded and joined the stream of workers making their way to the main conference room. The space had been reconfigured with additional seating and what appeared to be signal-blocking equipment in the corners. At the front of the room, a woman in an expensive suit consulted a tablet while two men in military dress uniforms flanked a projection screen. "Good morning," the woman began as the last workers found seats. "I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Project Security Coordinator for Meridian Defense Systems. Over the next few weeks, we'll be implementing security protocols necessary for classified defense work." She clicked through slides detailing security clearance requirements, compartmentalized work areas, and communication restrictions that would isolate classified projects from general manufacturing. Elena found herself categorizing each requirement by the level of paranoia it represented and the civil liberties it would compromise. "The background investigation process will begin immediately for all personnel assigned to classified work areas," Dr. Mitchell continued. "Federal investigators will conduct interviews with current and former colleagues, neighbors, and family members. Financial records will be examined. Foreign contacts will be documented and evaluated." Elena's pulse quickened as she realized the thoroughness of the investigation would inevitably uncover her previous identity. Dr. Elena Vasquez's security clearance had been revoked following her resignation from the Prometheus project, but the records would still exist in government databases. Questions would be asked about the gap between her aerospace career and her current employment. "Additionally," Dr. Mitchell said, advancing to the next slide, "we'll be conducting technical interviews to ensure that personnel possess the specialized knowledge required for this project. Some of you may be surprised by your own capabilities." The last comment seemed directed specifically at Elena, accompanied by a meaningful glance that suggested Dr. Mitchell knew more about her background than a security coordinator should. Elena forced herself to maintain neutral expression while internally calculating how quickly she could disappear if the situation deteriorated. After the briefing, workers filed out in small groups, discussing the implications of increased security and speculation about the classified project. Elena lingered, pretending to organize her tools while observing the security personnel. Their efficiency and coordination suggested military or intelligence backgrounds rather than typical corporate security. "Elena Vasquez?" Dr. Mitchell's voice carried across the nearly empty conference room. "Could I speak with you privately?" Elena approached the front of the room, her senses hyper-alert for signs of immediate threat. Dr. Mitchell gestured toward a smaller conference room that had been converted into a temporary office, complete with encryption equipment and secure communication devices. "Please sit," Dr. Mitchell said, settling behind a desk laden with files and tablets. "I wanted to discuss your role in the Meridian project personally." "I wasn't aware I'd been assigned to classified work," Elena replied carefully. "My security clearance application is still processing." Dr. Mitchell smiled, opening a file folder that contained far more information than should have been available to a defense contractor. Dr. Elena Vasquez, age 41, former propulsion systems engineer for NASA and classified aerospace projects. PhD in aerospace engineering from MIT, specialized focus on advanced propulsion systems and materials science. Elena felt the familiar ice in her stomach, but kept her voice steady. "You're confusing me with someone else. I'm a maintenance technician. 3 years ago, you legally changed your name and moved to Arizona following your resignation from a classified project. You've been working at Hammond Industries under your modified identity. using your extensive technical knowledge to excel at equipment maintenance and troubleshooting. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, her expression shifting from official to conspiratorial. Elena, we know exactly who you are. The question is whether you're willing to work with us voluntarily or whether we need to explore other options for securing your cooperation. Elena recognized the tone, soft coercion wrapped in professional courtesy. She'd heard it before from government officials who confused national security with personal convenience. What kind of cooperation? The Meridian project requires propulsion systems that can deliver precision payloads at intercontinental ranges. Your Prometheus engine designs, properly updated, could provide the technological edge we need to maintain strategic superiority. I don't work on weapons anymore. Weapons. Dr. Mitchell consulted her file again. Your financial situation suggests otherwise. Mortgage payments, property taxes, living expenses, all dependent on continued employment. Hammond Industries is about to become entirely focused on classified defense work. Employees who can't obtain security clearance will be terminated. The threat was elegantly constructed, economic pressure rather than legal compulsion, maintaining the fiction that Elena had choices while systematically eliminating them. It was the same approach that had trapped her in the Prometheus project years earlier. And if I cooperate? Full restoration of your security clearance, promotion to senior engineer position, salary commensurate with your qualifications and experience. You'd be working on the most advanced propulsion systems in the world, pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Elena studied Dr. Mitchell's face, looking for tells that might reveal the woman's true agenda. The offer was exactly what any aerospace engineer would want: unlimited resources, cutting-edge technology, professional recognition. The only price was building better ways to kill people. I need time to consider. Of course. But Elena, I should mention that your former colleague, Dr. James Patterson, specifically recommended you for this project. He speaks very highly of your technical capabilities and professional integrity. Elena stood to leave, recognizing the conversation's end. As she reached the door, Dr. Mitchell's voice stopped her. One more thing. The background investigation will examine your activities during the gap between your aerospace career and your employment here. Any irregularities in your transition might raise questions about your reliability for classified work. Elena understood the implication. Too much resistance would trigger a deeper investigation that might reveal activities during her disappearance that were better left undiscovered. The government was offering her a choice between cooperation and potential prosecution for crimes they might discover if they looked hard enough. She returned to the manufacturing floor, where normal work continued around the edges of increasing security presence. David Kim approached her workstation with obvious concern etched across his young features. Elena, what was that meeting about? You looked pretty serious coming out of there. Elena considered how much truth she could safely share. They're evaluating technical personnel for the classified project. Apparently, my experience with complex machinery makes me a candidate for more specialized work. That's great, right? Better pay, more interesting projects? Elena nodded absently while reviewing her limited options. She could refuse the assignment and face unemployment followed by intensive government scrutiny. She could accept and become complicit in weapons development that violated every principle she'd developed since leaving aerospace research. Or she could accept and find a way to sabotage the project from within. The third option was dangerous and probably illegal. It was also the only choice that allowed her to sleep at night. David, she said quietly, if you ever find yourself working on something that conflicts with your values, remember that there are always alternatives. Sometimes the most important choice is the one that looks impossible. David frowned, puzzled by the cryptic advice. Before he could ask for clarification, Marcus Chen approached with a clipboard and the harried expression of someone whose day was about to get worse. Elena, I need to talk to you about reassignment. Effective immediately, you're being transferred to the Special Projects Division. Higher pay grade, but you'll be working on classified systems that I'm not cleared to discuss. Elena accepted the transfer paperwork with steady hands while her mind raced through implications and contingencies. She was being moved into position like a chess piece, her expertise valued precisely because it could be weaponized. The government had identified her, isolated her, and was now deploying her toward objectives she'd spent 3 years trying to escape. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They assumed that Dr. Elena Vasquez, brilliant aerospace engineer, would be grateful for the opportunity to return to cutting-edge research. They hadn't anticipated Elena Vasquez, maintenance worker, who'd learned to value peace over prestige and integrity over innovation. As she cleared out her workstation and prepared for transfer to classified areas, Elena began planning her sabotage campaign. It would require careful timing, absolute discretion, and technical expertise that her new handlers would never suspect her of possessing. The government wanted to use her knowledge to build better weapons. Instead, she would use it to ensure those weapons never worked properly. It was time for Dr. Elena Vasquez to disappear one final time, taking her dangerous expertise with her. The classified wing of Hammond Industries felt like a different world. Elena's new security badge granted access to areas that hadn't existed a week earlier. Laboratories with equipment worth millions, computer systems isolated from external networks, and workspaces where conversations stopped when unauthorized personnel approached. Her new position came with the title Senior Propulsion Systems Analyst and a salary that tripled her maintenance wages. The office assigned to her contained a high-end computer, multiple monitors, and access to technical databases that would have impressed her former colleagues at NASA. On the surface, it represented everything she'd lost when she left aerospace research. But Elena understood the true nature of her situation. She was a prisoner with excellent benefits, an expert whose knowledge would be extracted and weaponized regardless of her personal preferences. The generous salary was bait, the prestigious title a manipulation, the cutting-edge equipment a tool for her own exploitation. Dr. Mitchell had introduced her to the project team Monday morning, a gathering of brilliant minds who'd been recruited from universities, private industry, and government laboratories. Each possessed specialized knowledge essential to the Meridian project, and each had been placed in a situation where cooperation was the only rational choice. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Mitchell announced to the assembled group, I'd like you to meet Dr. Elena Vasquez, our new propulsion systems specialist. Dr. Vasquez brings extensive experience in advanced engine design and materials science. Elena noted the careful wording. Her background was acknowledged without mentioning specific projects or the circumstances of her departure from aerospace research. The other team members were introduced with similar discretion. Their credentials impressive, but their personal histories diplomatically obscured. Dr. Marcus Thompson, the project's lead engineer, was a small man with prematurely gray hair and the intense focus of someone who'd spent decades solving problems that existed only in theoretical mathematics. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp with the curiosity of someone encountering a puzzle he couldn't immediately solve. Dr. Vasquez, he said after the introductions concluded, I've reviewed some of your published research. Your work on combustion efficiency and thrust vectoring was revolutionary. I'm curious how those innovations might apply to our current requirements. Elena chose her words carefully. Advanced propulsion requires balancing multiple variables: fuel efficiency, thrust output, materials limitations, environmental factors. The specific applications determine which compromises are acceptable. Indeed, And our applications require unprecedented precision and reliability. Military specifications are considerably more demanding than civilian aerospace standards. The comment was a test, Elena realized, designed to gauge her reaction to working on weapons systems. Dr. Thompson was evaluating whether she would embrace the military applications or require additional persuasion to fully cooperate. Precision is always important, she replied neutrally. Whether you're launching satellites or delivering packages, accuracy matters. Dr. Thompson smiled at her diplomatic response. Quite right. Well, I look forward to working with you. Your expertise could be exactly what we need to overcome some persistent technical challenges. Over the following days, Elena immersed herself in the Meridian project specifications, ostensibly to understand her role, but actually to identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The project was remarkably ambitious. Development of propulsion systems for what the documentation called strategic payload delivery vehicles. The euphemistic language couldn't hide the true purpose. They were building engines for intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of delivering multiple warheads with unprecedented accuracy. Her Prometheus designs were being adapted to power weapons that could eliminate targets anywhere on Earth within 30 minutes of launch authorization. Elena studied the technical requirements with growing horror. The specifications called for engines capable of sustained operation in extreme environments, thrust vectoring for terminal guidance, and modular design allowing rapid warhead reconfiguration. These weren't defensive weapons or conventional military systems. They were tools for global force projection and regime change. The project timeline was aggressive. 18 months from initial design to working prototypes, with production models following within 2 years. Military planners were clearly responding to perceived threats with crash program urgency, accepting cost overruns and security risks in exchange for rapid deployment capability. Elena began documenting every aspect of the project while identifying critical points where subtle sabotage could cripple development without obvious external interference. Propulsion systems were complex enough that small errors in design or manufacturing, retry s continue edit, could cascade into catastrophic failures during testing. The key was making such failures appear accidental while ensuring they couldn't be easily corrected. Her first opportunity came during the preliminary design review. Dr. Thompson had assigned her to optimize fuel injection systems for the primary combustion chamber, work that required intimate knowledge of thermodynamics and materials science. Elena threw herself into the assignment with apparent enthusiasm, producing calculations and simulations that demonstrated innovative solutions to persistent technical challenges. But buried within her elegant mathematical models were subtle flaws, pressure coefficients adjusted by fractions of a percent, thermal expansion calculations that ignored specific environmental factors, materials specifications that would fail catastrophically under precise conditions that wouldn't be discovered until full-scale testing. Brilliant work, Dr. Thompson said during her presentation to the engineering team. These efficiency improvements could increase payload capacity by 12% while reducing fuel requirements. The military will be very pleased with these innovations. Elena accepted the praise while internally cataloging each deliberate flaw she'd introduced. The engines would perform beautifully in computer simulations and laboratory testing. They would fail spectacularly when subjected to the stress conditions of actual flight, but only after months of development work had been completed and millions of dollars invested. The sabotage required extraordinary precision. Too obvious, and she'd be discovered and prosecuted. Too subtle, and the errors would be caught during quality control processes. Elena walked a razor's edge between effectiveness and detection, using her expertise to hide deliberate flaws within brilliant innovations. Her covert activities were complicated by David Kim's unexpected arrival in the classified wing. The young engineer had apparently impressed his supervisors enough to warrant security clearance and assignment to propulsion system support. His enthusiasm for cutting-edge technology was undimmed by knowledge of military applications. "Elena, this is incredible," David said as he examined her latest design specifications. "I've never seen fuel injection optimization at this level. You're essentially rewriting the fundamental principles of rocket propulsion. Just applying established physics to new problems?" Elena replied modestly. "The math gets complex, but the underlying principles are straightforward." David spent the afternoon studying her calculations with the absorption of someone encountering genius at work. Elena found his enthusiasm both heartbreaking and dangerous. Heartbreaking because it reminded her of her own younger self. Dangerous because his expertise might be sufficient to detect the subtle sabotage she'd embedded in the designs. That evening, Elena returned to her desert workshop to continue her real work, developing countermeasures for the weapons systems she was being forced to create. If her sabotage was discovered or proved insufficient, she needed backup plans for neutralizing the Meridian Project's eventual products. Her laptop contained encrypted files detailing the project's technical specifications, security protocols, and personnel assignments. The information was illegally obtained and potentially treasonous, but Elena had moved beyond caring about legal niceties. She was fighting a war against the militarization of her life's work, and wars required intelligence gathering. Dr. Patterson called again Tuesday evening, his voice carrying professional frustration mixed with personal concern. "Elena, I'm hearing reports that you're having difficulty adjusting to the project requirements. Dr. Mitchell mentioned some concerns about your enthusiasm for the work." "I'm doing my job, James. The technical challenges are fascinating." "That's not what I mean, and you know it. This project represents the pinnacle of propulsion research, the kind of work you always dreamed of doing. Yet Dr. Mitchell says you seem reluctant to fully embrace the opportunities it presents." Elena chose her words carefully, aware that the conversation might be monitored. "I'm focused on technical excellence rather than applications. Good engineering requires attention to detail over enthusiasm for outcomes. Elena, I need you to understand something. The international situation is deteriorating rapidly. Foreign powers are developing capabilities that threaten American interests globally. The weapons systems we're building could prevent conflicts by demonstrating overwhelming technological superiority. Or they could start conflicts by forcing other nations to develop countermeasures." Patterson's voice hardened. "That's not your concern. Your concern is building propulsion systems that work as designed. Political implications are above your clearance level." The conversation ended with polite professionalism that couldn't hide underlying tension. Elena understood that her commitment to the project was being questioned, which meant closer scrutiny of her work and potential discovery of her sabotage efforts. She needed to accelerate her timeline while maintaining the appearance of enthusiastic cooperation. The balance was becoming increasingly precarious, but the stakes were too high for half measures. Wednesday brought a development that changed everything. Dr. Mitchell called Elena into her office for what she described as a routine progress review, but the additional security personnel and recording equipment suggested more serious purposes. "Dr. Vasquez," Dr. Mitchell began formally, "we've been monitoring your work on the propulsion optimization project. Your technical contributions have been exceptional, but we have some concerns about your overall approach to classified work." Elena maintained neutral expression while calculating distances to exits and evaluating potential responses to various scenarios. "What kind of concerns?" "Your computer access logs show unusual patterns, late-night research into project areas outside your assigned responsibilities, database queries that suggest broader interest in project architecture than necessary for your specific tasks." The accusations were carefully constructed to suggest security violations without explicit charges. Elena recognized the technique: create an atmosphere of suspicion while maintaining plausible deniability about the investigation's true purpose. "I like to understand how my work fits into the larger system," Elena replied. "Propulsion optimization requires knowledge of vehicle dynamics, guidance systems, and payload specifications. That's exactly what concerns us. Your background includes experience with classified projects that ended badly. We need assurance that you understand the importance of compartmentalized work and limited scope of responsibility." Dr. Mitchell opened a file containing documents that made Elena's blood freeze. Classified reports from the Prometheus project, including her resignation letter and the circumstances that led to her departure from aerospace research. Security clearance revocation paperwork. FBI interview summaries from the investigation that followed her whistleblowing attempts. Your previous work with Dr. Patterson included some philosophical differences about the applications of advanced technology. We need to ensure that those differences don't interfere with your current responsibilities. Elena realized she was being warned that her history of conscience was known and considered a liability. The government had identified her as a potential security risk, while simultaneously requiring her expertise for weapons development. They wanted her knowledge, but not her judgment, her skills, but not her integrity. "I understand my responsibilities," she said carefully. "I hope so. Because, Dr. Vasquez, the Meridian Project is too important for personal reservations about military applications. The technology we're developing will shape global power relationships for the next 50 years. Individual concerns must be subordinated to national interests." The meeting ended with Elena's continued assignment to the project, but under increased surveillance. Her computer access would be monitored more closely, her communications scrutinized, her movements tracked. The government was tightening its grip while maintaining the fiction that she was a willing participant. That evening, Elena sat in her workshop surrounded by the honest simplicity of mechanical systems that couldn't be corrupted into instruments of war. But even here, she couldn't escape the knowledge that her expertise was being used to threaten lives she would never see in conflicts she barely understood. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Dr. Vasquez, we need to talk. There are others who share your concerns about the Meridian Project. Tomorrow, 7 p.m., Desert View Trail parking area. Come alone. A friend." Elena stared at the message for several minutes, considering possibilities. It could be a trap, an attempt to document her security violations and justify more aggressive action. Or it could be what it claimed: contact from others within the project who had similar reservations about building weapons that could reshape global warfare. She deleted the message and began preparing for what might be either salvation or destruction. In a project designed to create ultimate weapons, she was about to discover that she wasn't the only person who valued conscience over career advancement. The desert night was about to reveal allies she'd never suspected and dangers she couldn't imagine. The Desert View Trail parking area sat in absolute darkness 40 miles outside Phoenix, a recreation spot popular with hikers and stargazers during daylight hours, but abandoned after sunset. Elena arrived 15 minutes early, parking her truck in a position that allowed multiple escape routes while providing clear sightlines to approaching vehicles. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly in all directions, its silence broken only by distant coyote calls and the whisper of wind through sagebrush. Elena checked her watch repeatedly, second-guessing the decision to respond to an anonymous message that could easily be a security test designed to document her willingness to engage in unauthorized contact. At exactly 7 p.m., a dark sedan pulled into the parking area with its headlights off, navigating by moonlight alone. The driver emerged slowly, hands visible, approaching Elena's truck with the careful movements of someone aware they might be under observation. "Dr. Vasquez?" The voice belonged to a woman, middle-aged, with the crisp diction of someone accustomed to technical precision. Thank you for coming. I know this seems irregular, but the situation requires unconventional approaches. Elena rolled down her window but kept the engine running. Who are you? Dr. Sarah Chen, materials science specialist assigned to the Meridian Project. I've been watching your work with great interest, particularly your approach to thermal dynamics modeling. Elena recognized the name from project documentation, but had never met Dr. Chen personally. The Materials Science Division operated independently from propulsion systems. Their work focused on composite structures and heat-resistant alloys rather than engine design. What do you want? Elena asked. Dr. Chen moved closer, speaking quietly, despite the isolation. I want to discuss the possibility that there are flaws in the Meridian project design. Subtle errors that could cause catastrophic failures during testing phases. Elena felt her pulse quicken. Dr. Chen was either a remarkably perceptive engineer who detected sabotage or an intelligence operative attempting to document security violations. Either possibility was dangerous. All complex systems have potential failure modes, Elena replied carefully. That's why we have extensive testing protocols. Indeed, but some failure modes are more elegant than others. Failures that appear accidental but result from systematic design flaws introduced by personnel who understand systems well enough to predict their weaknesses. The conversation had moved beyond subtle probing into direct acknowledgement of sabotage activities. Elena needed to make a choice. Trust this unknown colleague or retreat into protective silence that might leave her isolated against increasingly aggressive government pressure. Why are you telling me this? Elena asked. Dr. Chen reached into her jacket, producing a small tablet that displayed technical specifications Elena recognized as her own work. But these weren't the official versions submitted to project leadership. These were her original calculations before she'd introduced deliberate flaws. Because you're not the only person who believes that building better weapons isn't the answer to global security challenges. And you're not the only person who's been making subtle adjustments to ensure that certain systems don't work as intended. Elena stared at the tablet screen, seeing her own sabotage efforts revealed in detail. Either Dr. Chen possessed extraordinary analytical skills, or she had access to information that should have been impossible to obtain. How did you get these calculations? The same way I obtained evidence that 3 other team members have been introducing similar design flaws into their respective components. Dr. Vasquez, we're not alone in this. There's an entire network of engineers and scientists who've been recruited for weapons projects against their will or better judgment. Dr. Chen swiped to additional screens, showing design modifications across multiple project areas. Guidance systems with subtle navigation errors, composite materials with hidden structural weaknesses, communication arrays with built-in failure points. Each modification was brilliantly concealed within legitimate technical improvements. This is treason, Elena whispered, though she felt a surge of relief at discovering she wasn't the only person sabotaging the project. This is conscience, Dr. Chen corrected. We're preventing the development of weapons that could destabilize global power relationships and encourage nuclear proliferation by nations seeking to counter American strategic advantages. Elena studied the evidence of systematic sabotage while processing the implications. If Dr. Chen was telling the truth, the Meridian Project was being undermined by its own technical personnel. Experts who'd been coerced into weapons development but retained enough integrity to ensure the weapons wouldn't work properly. What do you want from me? Elena asked. Elena. Coordination. Individual sabotage efforts are vulnerable to detection and correction. But coordinated efforts that create interdependent failure modes become much harder to identify and fix. We need your expertise to ensure that propulsion system failures cascade through other project components. Elena made her decision based on instinct rather than analysis. Dr. Chen's technical knowledge was too detailed to be fake, her access to classified information too extensive to be coincidental. Either she was exactly what she claimed, a fellow saboteur seeking coordination, or she was an extraordinarily sophisticated intelligence operative conducting an elaborate sting operation. What kind of coordination? Elena asked. Dr. Chen smiled, the expression transforming her serious features. The kind that ensures the most dangerous weapons program in American history never produces a single functional weapon. Over the next hour, Dr. Chen outlined a network of technical personnel who'd been recruited into various classified projects across the defense industry. Materials scientists, guidance specialists, communications engineers, computer programmers, all working to ensure that next-generation weapon systems failed during crucial testing phases. The approach is simple, Dr. Chen explained. We introduce subtle flaws that appear accidental but create systemic vulnerabilities. When components are tested individually, they perform within acceptable parameters. But when integrated into complete systems, the combined effects cause catastrophic failures that appear to result from normal engineering challenges. Elena found herself impressed by the sophistication of the sabotage campaign. Rather than obvious destruction or crude interference, the network was using technical expertise to create weapons that would fail precisely when they were most needed, during military operations where failure meant mission failure rather than simple embarrassment. How many people are involved? Elena asked. 17 confirmed, probably twice that many working independently. The defense industry has recruited so many specialists for weapons programs that they've inadvertently created a critical mass of people who object to their own forced participation. Elena considered the implications. If Dr. Chen's numbers were accurate, the systematic sabotage represented one of the most successful intelligence operations in history, conducted not by foreign agents, but by American citizens who refused to build weapons they considered immoral. What's the long-term objective? Elena asked. Project failure leading to program cancellation. If the Meridian project produces a series of expensive failures during testing, Congress will cut funding and military planners will return to conventional weapons systems. The technology for intercontinental precision warfare will remain theoretical rather than operational. Elena understood the elegance of the approach. Rather than attempting to expose classified programs through whistleblowing, which had failed repeatedly and resulted in persecution of the whistleblowers, the network was using technical expertise to ensure the programs failed on their own terms. The risks are considerable, Dr. Chen continued. If we're discovered, we face prosecution for treason, espionage, and sabotage. Prison sentences measured in decades, destruction of our professional reputations, and permanent exile from any work requiring security clearances. And if we succeed, weapons programs fail. Military planners develop alternative strategies. Global stability is preserved by preventing the deployment of systems that would force other nations to develop countermeasures or abandon restraint in their own weapons development. Elena felt the weight of decision pressing down on her like desert heat. Joining the sabotage network would commit her to a course of action that could destroy her life if discovered. Refusing would leave her isolated against government pressure that was already becoming unbearable. But the choice, when it came, was easier than she'd expected. What do you need me to do? Elena asked. Dr. Chen handed her an encrypted phone and a set of technical specifications that would guide her sabotage efforts for maximum effect. Welcome to the Resistance, Dr. Vasquez. We're going to save the world by building weapons that don't work. As Elena drove home through the desert darkness, she felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for 3 years. She was no longer hiding from her expertise or running from her past. Instead, she was using her knowledge to prevent the kind of technological catastrophe that had driven her from aerospace research. The government wanted to weaponize her brilliance. The resistance would help her turn that brilliance against the weapons themselves. Elena's new role in the sabotage network required her to think like a different kind of engineer, one whose success was measured by elegant failures rather than innovative solutions. Over the following weeks, she refined her approach to introducing flaws that would remain undetected until the most critical moments of system testing. The encrypted phone Dr. Chen had provided connected her to a communications network that operated through seemingly innocent technical discussions. Engineers across the defense industry shared information about their projects using coded language that appeared to be normal professional consultation, but actually coordinated sabotage efforts across multiple weapons programs. Dr. Vasquez, came a message from someone identified only as Materials Specialist 7. I'm having trouble with thermal expansion coefficients in composite structures. Could you review my calculations regarding propulsion system interface requirements? Elena decoded the message as a request for information about engine operating temperatures that would help the materials scientist introduce heat-related failures in structural components. She provided detailed specifications that would allow perfect integration during testing but catastrophic failure under operational stress conditions. The coordination was remarkably sophisticated. Each team member contributed sabotage that appeared accidental when considered independently, but created systematic vulnerabilities when combined. Elena's propulsion system modifications would interact with guidance errors, materials failures, and communication disruptions to ensure that complete weapons systems would fail spectacularly during crucial testing phases. David Kim's assignment to her division complicated Elena's sabotage efforts considerably. The young engineer's enthusiasm for cutting-edge technology made him eager to understand every aspect of the propulsion systems, which meant he spent considerable time reviewing Elena's calculations and design modifications. Elena, I've been studying your fuel injection optimization models, David said during their Thursday morning technical review. The efficiency improvements are incredible, but I'm having trouble understanding some of the thermal dynamics calculations. Elena felt her pulse quicken as David pointed to equations where she'd introduced subtle errors designed to cause combustion instability under specific flight conditions. His mathematical skills were sophisticated enough to detect the flaws if he analyzed them carefully. Which calculations specifically? Elena asked, hoping to redirect his attention away from the most dangerous sabotage. These pressure differential equations, the numbers seem internally consistent, but when I model them against real-world flight conditions, I get some strange results at high altitude and velocity combinations. Elena's mouth went dry. David had identified exactly the conditions where her sabotage would cause catastrophic engine failure. High-speed flight at maximum operational altitude, precisely the environment where intercontinental missiles would operate during actual missions. Interesting, Elena said, buying time while her mind raced through possible explanations. What kind of strange results? David pulled up his computer models, displaying three-dimensional simulations that showed fuel injection patterns under various flight conditions. In most scenarios, Elena's optimizations produced smooth, efficient combustion. But at extreme altitude and velocity, the simulation showed chaotic pressure variations that would destroy any engine within seconds. It looks like combustion instability, David continued, obviously puzzled by the results. But that doesn't make sense given the elegance of your other calculations. I must be making an error in my modeling assumptions. Elena realized she was at a crossroads. She could maintain her sabotage by convincing David that his models were flawed, but doing so would require lying to someone who trusted her professional judgment. Or she could reveal the truth and hope that David's conscience would prove stronger than his career ambitions. David, she said carefully, what would you do if you discovered that a weapons system you were working on had systematic design flaws that would cause it to fail during actual use? David looked puzzled by the hypothetical question. I'd report the flaws so they could be corrected. Lives depend on this technology working properly. And if the flaws were deliberate, introduced by someone who believed the weapons shouldn't work properly? David's expression shifted from puzzlement to shock as he began to understand the implications. Elena, are you saying that someone has been sabotaging the Meridian project? Elena studied his face, looking for signs of the moral flexibility that would make him dangerous to the resistance network. What she saw instead was the same ethical confusion she'd experienced when first confronted with the reality of weapons development. I'm asking what you would do if you found yourself building weapons that could kill millions of people in conflicts you don't understand, for purposes you can't control, with technology that you developed for peaceful applications. David was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of Elena's questions. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone whose worldview was collapsing in real time. I became an engineer to build things that help people. Clean energy systems, medical devices, maybe spacecraft for exploration. I never thought about building weapons until I was already trapped in contracts and security clearances that make leaving almost impossible. Elena recognized the moral crisis in David's voice, the same anguish she'd experienced when her Prometheus designs were weaponized. She made a decision that violated every security protocol, but honored every principle she'd learned during 3 years of exile. David, there are people working within the defense industry who share your concerns. People who believe that building better weapons isn't the answer to global security challenges. People who found ways to ensure that certain weapons never become operational. David stared at her with growing understanding. The combustion instability in your calculations. It's not an error. It's deliberate. Elena nodded slowly. The Meridian project is designed to produce intercontinental weapons that could destabilize global power relationships and encourage nuclear proliferation. Some of us have decided that such weapons shouldn't exist. But this is treason. Sabotaging defense projects, undermining national security. Is building weapons that could start global conflicts really national security? Or is preventing those weapons from working actually protecting American interests? Elena spent the next hour explaining the sabotage network's philosophy and objectives, while David wrestled with ethical implications that had no clear answers. The young engineer's idealism was being tested against pragmatic realities that most people never faced. What do you want from me? David finally asked. Nothing, if you're not comfortable with it. But if you decide that preventing the development of these weapons is more important than career advancement, there are ways to help that don't require direct sabotage. Elena outlined how David could assist the resistance without compromising his own security, providing technical information that helped coordinate sabotage efforts, introducing minor modifications that enhanced other people's sabotage, and identifying critical system vulnerabilities that could be exploited by network members. I need time to think, David said finally. Of course. But David, remember that this conversation never happened. The security implications for everyone involved are severe. Over the following days, Elena watched David struggle with competing loyalties and conflicting principles. He continued working on propulsion systems with apparent enthusiasm, while obviously processing the moral implications of weapons development. Elena recognized the signs of someone whose conscience was at war with practical necessities. The resolution came during their Monday morning technical review, when David presented modified calculations that appeared to correct the combustion instability Elena had introduced. But closer examination revealed that his corrections actually enhanced the sabotage, ensuring that engine failures would occur earlier in flight sequences and be more difficult to detect during ground testing. "I've been thinking about our conversation," David said quietly, "about building things that help people versus building things that hurt people. I think you're right that preventing the development of certain weapons might actually protect American interests better than deploying them." Elena felt a surge of relief mixed with concern for David's safety. Recruiting new members for the sabotage network was always dangerous, both for the recruits and for existing members who could be exposed if security was compromised. "Are you sure about this?" Elena asked. "The risks are considerable, and once you're involved, there's no going back to innocent ignorance." David nodded with the determination of someone who'd made peace with dangerous choices. "I didn't become an engineer to build better ways to kill people. If preventing that requires taking risks, then that's what I'll do." Elena provided David with encrypted communication protocols and introduced him to the network through carefully controlled contacts. His youth and idealism were valuable assets, but his inexperience with security procedures made him vulnerable to discovery if he wasn't carefully managed. The resistance was growing, but so were the risks. Each new member increased the network's capability, while also increasing the probability of detection. Elena found herself balancing revolutionary objectives against survival instincts, trying to maximize impact while minimizing exposure. Meanwhile, Dr. Mitchell's surveillance of Elena's activities was becoming more intensive. Computer access logs were monitored in real time, communications were intercepted and analyzed, and her movements around the facility were tracked by security cameras that seemed to follow her everywhere. "Dr. Vasquez," Dr. Mitchell said during their Friday afternoon review meeting, "I've noticed some interesting patterns in your recent work. Your technical contributions continue to be exceptional, but there seem to be some anomalies in your approach to system integration." Elena maintained neutral expression while internally calculating how much of her sabotage had been detected. "What kind of anomalies?" "Your propulsion models show remarkable innovation in most areas, but there are some calculations that seem unnecessarily complex, almost as if you're solving problems that don't exist while creating problems that weren't there originally." The observation was dangerously perceptive. Dr. Mitchell was either an exceptionally skilled engineer who detected technical inconsistencies or an intelligence specialist who understood that sabotage often involved creating failures disguised as innovations. "Complex systems require complex solutions," Elena replied. "I'm trying to optimize performance across multiple operational parameters simultaneously." "Indeed. But optimization usually simplifies systems rather than complicating them. Your recent work seems to be moving in the opposite direction." Elena realized that her sabotage was becoming sophisticated enough to attract attention from security personnel who were trained to detect deliberate technical interference. She needed to modify her approach, making future sabotage more subtle, while ensuring that existing flaws remained undetected. The conversation ended with renewed warnings about the importance of security and cooperation, but Elena understood that her position was becoming precarious. Discovery was no longer a distant possibility, but an immediate threat that required careful navigation. That evening, she used the encrypted phone to send a message to the network. "Surveillance increasing. Need to modify approach and prepare contingency plans. The resistance may be entering its most dangerous phase." The response came within minutes. "Understood. Phase 2. Protocols are now active. Prepare for acceleration of objectives." Elena realized that the sabotage network was moving beyond subtle interference toward more aggressive action designed to ensure project failure before security measures could expose their activities. The quiet war against weapons development was about to become much more dangerous for everyone involved. Phase 2 of the Resistance Networks campaign began with a coordinated effort to accelerate system failures across multiple defense projects simultaneously. Elena received detailed instructions through encrypted channels, outlining how her propulsion system sabotage could be enhanced to interact with planned failures in guidance, communications, and materials systems. The approach was brilliant in its simplicity. Rather than relying on isolated sabotage that could be detected and corrected, the network would create cascading failures that appeared to result from fundamental design challenges rather than deliberate interference. When the Meridian project's first major testing phase began, every critical system would fail in ways that seemed accidental, but were actually carefully orchestrated. Elena's role involved modifying her existing sabotage to ensure that propulsion failures occurred at precisely the moments when other systems were experiencing their own planned malfunctions. The timing required extraordinary precision. Too early, and the failures could be attributed to individual component problems. Too late, and other systems might compensate for propulsion deficiencies. Dr. Vasquez, David said during their Tuesday morning review, "I've been analyzing the integration protocols for next month's testing phase. The system synchronization requirements are incredibly complex." Elena recognized David's coded language as a request for coordination details. His official assignment to integration testing gave him access to scheduling information that was crucial for timing the coordinated sabotage. "Integration is always challenging," Elena replied carefully, aware that their conversation might be monitored. Each subsystem has to perform optimally while interfacing smoothly with all other components. Small variations in timing can have significant effects on overall performance. David nodded, understanding her meaning. He would provide precise timing information that would allow the network to synchronize failures across multiple systems during the first major test of a complete Meridian prototype. Over the following weeks, Elena refined her sabotage with assistance from network members who possessed complementary expertise. Her propulsion modifications were enhanced by materials scientists who ensured that engine housings would fail under the exact stress conditions her combustion irregularities would create. Guidance specialists provided navigation errors that would amplify the directional instabilities her thrust vector modifications would cause. The coordination was so sophisticated that Elena found herself impressed by the network's technical capabilities despite the dangerous circumstances. They weren't just preventing weapons development. They were conducting a masterclass in systems engineering applied to systematic failure creation. Dr. Mitchell's surveillance efforts intensified as the testing phase approached. Elena's computer access was restricted to essential files. Her communications were monitored in real time, and her movements around the facility were tracked by security personnel who maintained constant but discreet observation. "Dr. Vasquez," Dr. Mitchell said during an unexpected meeting Thursday afternoon, "we've been conducting routine security reviews as we approach the critical testing phase. I need to ask you some questions about your technical approach to certain aspects of the propulsion system design." Elena sat across from Dr. Mitchell in the secure conference room, noting the presence of additional security personnel and recording equipment that suggested this was more than a routine review. The questions that followed were carefully constructed to test her knowledge of sabotage techniques and her commitment to project success. "Your fuel injection optimization includes some innovative approaches to combustion chamber design," Dr. Mitchell observed. "Could you explain the theoretical basis for your modifications to pressure differential equations?" Elena recognized the trap. Dr. Mitchell was asking her to explain technical decisions that would reveal whether her modifications were based on legitimate engineering principles or deliberate sabotage objectives. The question required her to either confess to sabotage or provide explanations that could be verified through independent analysis. The modifications address thermal efficiency challenges at high-altitude flight conditions, Elena replied, choosing words that were technically accurate but incomplete. Standard combustion models don't account for pressure variations that occur during extreme acceleration phases. Dr. Mitchell consulted her files, cross-referencing Elena's explanations with technical analyses that had obviously been conducted by independent experts. Our consulting engineers have reviewed your calculations and found some interesting characteristics. The modifications improve efficiency under normal conditions, but create instability patterns under certain specific operational parameters. Elena felt ice forming in her stomach as she realized that outside experts had identified the exact conditions where her sabotage would cause catastrophic failures. The discovery meant that her modifications could be corrected before testing, undermining months of careful sabotage work. Instability patterns can often be corrected through calibration adjustments, Elena said, hoping to minimize the perceived significance of the problems. Indeed, but these particular patterns are unusual because they seem to be designed rather than accidental. Almost as if someone who understood combustion dynamics extremely well had deliberately created conditions for failure under specific circumstances. The accusation was carefully phrased to avoid direct charges while making clear that Elena's sabotage had been detected. Dr. Mitchell was giving her an opportunity to confess and cooperate rather than face formal investigation and prosecution. Elena made a decision that surprised herself. Instead of confession or denial, she chose defiance. Dr. Mitchell, if you have evidence of sabotage, you should present it formally and charge me appropriately. If you don't have such evidence, then I suggest we focus on technical excellence rather than security paranoia. Dr. Mitchell's expression hardened. Dr. Vasquez, you're walking a very dangerous line. The Meridian Project is vital to national security, and interference with its development is a federal crime punishable by life imprisonment. And coercing engineers to build weapons against their conscience is a violation of professional ethics that should concern anyone who values scientific integrity. The confrontation ended with Elena's assignment to modified duties under enhanced supervision, but she hadn't been arrested or formally charged with sabotage. Dr. Mitchell apparently lacked sufficient evidence for prosecution while possessing enough suspicion to restrict Elena's access to critical systems. Elena used the encrypted phone that evening to report the security breach to the network. Her message was brief but urgent. Sabotage detected. Modifications discovered. Prepare for acceleration of Phase 2 objectives. The response came within minutes. Understood. Emergency protocols now active. Prepare for extraction if necessary. Elena realized that the resistance network had contingency plans for members whose security was compromised, but extraction would mean abandoning her sabotage efforts and leaving other network members vulnerable to discovery. She needed to find a way to continue her mission while avoiding arrest long enough for the coordinated failures to destroy the Meridian Project. Friday brought news that changed everything. David approached Elena's workstation with barely concealed excitement, speaking quietly despite the enhanced surveillance surrounding her activities. Elena, the first major prototype test has been moved up to next Tuesday. Full system integration, complete flight simulation, all subsystems operational. If there are any design problems, they'll be discovered during this test. Elena understood the implications immediately. The network's carefully planned sabotage would be tested 4 days earlier than expected, before final coordination could be completed and before backup plans could be implemented. The accelerated timeline was probably Dr. Mitchell's attempt to test the systems before sabotage efforts could be enhanced or corrected. Are all integration protocols finalized? Elena asked, using coded language to determine whether other network members had been informed of the schedule change. As far as I know, the guidance and materials teams have completed their final adjustments. Communication systems were locked down yesterday. Everything's ready for comprehensive testing. Elena felt a surge of anticipation mixed with terror. If the network's sabotage functioned as planned, Tuesday's test would destroy the Meridian prototype spectacularly, demonstrating that the weapon system was too unreliable for deployment. But if the sabotage had been detected and corrected, the test would succeed, and Elena would face arrest for treason. The weekend passed slowly as Elena prepared for what might be either vindication or catastrophe. She reviewed her sabotage modifications, confirming that they remained embedded in the system despite Dr. Mitchell's suspicions. She studied the technical specifications for Tuesday's test, identifying critical moments when cascading failures would have maximum impact. Most importantly, she prepared for the possibility that success or failure might require her to disappear entirely from her carefully constructed life in Arizona. The Resistance Network's extraction protocols would provide new identity and relocation, but at the cost of abandoning everything she'd built during 3 years of exile. Monday evening, Elena stood in her workshop surrounded by honest mechanical systems that couldn't be corrupted into instruments of war. Her phone displayed a final message from the network. All systems prepared. Tomorrow we discover whether conscience or coercion proves stronger. Whatever happens, your contributions have been essential. Elena closed the workshop and walked into the desert night, looking up at stars that had guided human navigation for millennia. Tomorrow, she would learn whether technical expertise applied to deliberate failure could prevent the development of weapons that might threaten those same stars. The test would determine not just the success of the Meridian project, but the future of warfare itself. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made the Arizona desert look like a landscape from another planet. Elena drove to Hammond Industries, knowing that this day would determine the outcome of months of careful sabotage and the future of weapon systems that could reshape global conflict. The facility buzzed with activity as engineers, technicians, and military observers prepared for the Meridian project's first major prototype test. The event represented more than just system validation. It was a demonstration for Pentagon officials and congressional representatives who would determine funding for full-scale production. Elena arrived to find the classified wing transformed into something resembling mission control. Multiple monitors displayed real-time data from the test prototype. Communication systems connected the facility to observing officials across the country, and security personnel maintained perimeters that emphasized the historic significance of the day's events. Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Mitchell said as Elena entered the primary observation room, I want you positioned where you can monitor propulsion system performance in real time. Your expertise may be needed to interpret any anomalous readings. Elena recognized the assignment as both an honor and a trap retry continue edit. Dr. Mitchell wanted her expertise available for troubleshooting, but also wanted her under close observation during the test. If sabotage was discovered, Elena's reactions would be monitored for signs of guilt or satisfaction. She took her assigned position at a monitoring station equipped with displays showing every aspect of propulsion system performance. Heart rate, fuel flow, combustion chamber pressure, thrust vector orientation. All the parameters she'd spent months carefully corrupting through subtle modifications that would appear accidental until the critical moment. Dr. Thompson stood at the central command station, coordinating communications with the remote testing facility where the Meridian prototype awaited launch. His voice carried the controlled excitement of someone whose life's work was about to be validated or destroyed in a single test. All stations report readiness, Dr. Thompson announced. Propulsion systems nominal, guidance computers online, communications arrays active. We are go for comprehensive system testing. Elena watched her displays while counting down the minutes until her sabotage would be tested under real operational conditions. The propulsion modifications she'd introduced would remain undetectable until the engine experienced the specific combination of altitude, velocity, and thermal stress that occurred during intercontinental flight profiles. T-minus 10 minutes and counting, came the announcement from the test facility. All systems nominal, weather conditions optimal, range clear for testing. Elena's pulse quickened as she reviewed the test profile one final time. Initial launch would test basic propulsion and guidance systems under relatively benign conditions. But the critical phase would come 12 minutes into the flight, when the prototype attempted to simulate intercontinental trajectory requirements. That was when her combustion instability modifications would interact with materials failures and guidance errors to create cascading system failure. David Kim appeared at Elena's station, officially reviewing integration data, but actually providing final coordination information through carefully coded language. Dr. Vasquez, I've been monitoring interface protocols between propulsion and guidance systems. Everything looks synchronized for optimal performance. Elena understood his meaning. The network's sabotage was coordinated and ready. Propulsion failures would occur simultaneously with guidance malfunctions, creating system-wide breakdown that would appear accidental but was actually precisely orchestrated. T-minus 5 minutes, announced the test director. Final systems check complete. All parameters nominal. We are go for launch. Elena found herself holding her breath as the countdown entered its final phase. 3 years of exile, months of sabotage planning, and weeks of dangerous coordination were about to be tested in a single flight that would last less than 30 minutes. T-minus 30 seconds. Propulsion systems armed, guidance computers active, telemetry nominal. Elena's displays showed perfect system performance as the prototype prepared for launch. Her sabotage remained undetected, embedded within legitimate engineering calculations that would reveal their true nature only under operational stress. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition. The prototype launched flawlessly, its engines producing exactly the thrust levels Elena's calculations had predicted. For the first several minutes, all systems performed precisely as designed, validating the engineering excellence that made the Meridian project a technological marvel. Elena watched her propulsion monitoring displays while simultaneously tracking the overall mission timeline. Everything appeared normal as the prototype climbed through various altitude and velocity phases, executing maneuvers that demonstrated the sophisticated integration of multiple complex systems. 8 minutes into flight, Dr. Thompson announced. All systems nominal, propulsion efficiency exceeding design specifications. Elena felt sweat forming on her forehead despite the controlled environment. Her sabotage was designed to activate during the most stressful phase of simulated intercontinental flight, which would begin in approximately 4 minutes. Until then, the prototype would continue performing perfectly. 11 minutes, 30 seconds. Beginning intercontinental simulation phase. Increasing velocity and altitude to operational parameters. Elena's displays suddenly flickered as engine parameters shifted into the regime where her modifications would take effect. Combustion chamber pressure began showing minor variations that were within normal tolerance but represented the beginning of systematic instability. 12 minutes, 15 seconds, minor anomaly in propulsion telemetry, combustion pressure showing irregular patterns. Dr. Thompson frowned at his displays while Elena fought to maintain neutral expression. The sabotage was beginning to manifest exactly as planned, but she needed to appear surprised and concerned rather than satisfied. Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Thompson called, "Are you seeing the pressure variations in combustion chamber 3? Elena studied her displays with apparent concentration, while internally celebrating the success of her sabotage. Confirmed. Pressure variations increasing in amplitude. Could be fuel injection synchronization issues. 12 minutes, 45 seconds. Propulsion anomalies increasing. Guidance system showing navigation errors. Materials stress approaching tolerance limits. Elena realized that the network's coordination was functioning perfectly. Her propulsion sabotage was interacting with guidance and materials failures exactly as planned, creating cascading system breakdown that would be impossible to correct during flight. 13 minutes, 10 seconds. Multiple system failures detected. Propulsion instability causing thrust vector errors. Guidance computers unable to compensate. Dr. Thompson's voice carried increasing urgency as the prototype's condition deteriorated rapidly. All stations, implement emergency protocols. Attempt system stabilization and prepare for controlled termination if necessary. Elena watched her displays showing the beautiful chaos of systematic failure. Combustion pressures oscillated wildly, thrust vectors pointed in random directions, and engine temperatures climbed toward catastrophic levels. Her sabotage was performing exactly as designed. 13 minutes, 30 seconds. Catastrophic system failure detected. Terminating flight test. Initiating emergency destruction sequence. The prototype exploded in a brilliant fireball visible on tracking cameras, its destruction both spectacular and apparently accidental. To outside observers, the Meridian system had simply encountered engineering challenges that caused multiple system failures during stress testing. Elena allowed herself to feel satisfaction while maintaining the appropriate expression of professional disappointment. The test had failed spectacularly, validating the resistance network's sabotage while appearing to result from normal engineering difficulties. Ladies and gentlemen, Doctor Thompson announced to the observation room, "We have experienced what appears to be a cascading system failure during high-stress testing. Initial analysis suggests multiple component interactions that created unstable flight conditions." Dr. Mitchell approached Elena's monitoring station with an expression that mixed suspicion with grudging respect. "Dr. Vasquez, your propulsion systems were among the first to show anomalies. What's your initial assessment?" Elena chose her words carefully, providing technically accurate analysis that concealed her role in creating the failures. The pressure instabilities suggest fundamental problems with fuel injection timing under extreme thermal conditions. The combustion chambers weren't designed to handle the stress combinations we encountered during intercontinental simulation. Could these problems have been predicted through more comprehensive ground testing? Elena felt the trap in Dr. Mitchell's question. Admission that the failures were predictable would suggest that someone with appropriate expertise could have introduced them deliberately. Complex systems often reveal unexpected failure modes under operational stress, Elena replied. That's why we conduct flight testing rather than relying solely on computer simulations. The immediate aftermath of the test failure brought chaos to the observation room as engineers began analyzing telemetry data, and military officials demanded explanations for the spectacular destruction of a prototype that had cost hundreds of millions of dollars to develop. Elena maintained her role as a concerned propulsion specialist while internally celebrating the success of the resistance network's most ambitious operation. The Meridian project's credibility had been destroyed in 13 minutes and 30 seconds of carefully orchestrated system failure. But her satisfaction was tempered by knowledge that Dr. Mitchell's suspicions remained unproven, but undimmed. The security coordinator was studying telemetry data with the focused intensity of someone looking for evidence of sabotage rather than accidental failure. Elena realized that the test's success was only the beginning of a new and more dangerous phase. The resistance had demonstrated that weapons programs could be undermined by their own technical personnel, but they had also revealed their capabilities to security officials who would now implement countermeasures designed to prevent future sabotage. The war between conscience and coercion was entering a new phase, and Elena found herself at the center of conflicts that would determine whether technical expertise could be forced to serve military objectives or whether individual integrity could prevail against institutional pressure. The afternoon brought emergency meetings, intensive data analysis, and the beginning of investigations that would either expose the resistance network or validate their careful planning. Elena prepared for what might be either vindication or catastrophe, knowing that Tuesday's test had changed everything. The conference room felt like a tribunal as Elena sat across from Dr. Mitchell, Dr. Thompson, and two officials she didn't recognize, but whose bearings suggested military intelligence backgrounds. The walls were lined with printouts of telemetry data from Tuesday's failed test, each graph and chart representing another piece of evidence in an investigation that could end with prison sentences or worse. Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Mitchell began, her voice carrying the cold professionalism of someone conducting an interrogation rather than a technical review. We've spent the past 48 hours analyzing every aspect of Tuesday's test failure. The data reveals some very interesting patterns. Elena maintained steady eye contact while her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd spent 2 sleepless nights preparing for this moment, rehearsing explanations that would deflect suspicion while providing plausible technical analysis of the system failures. One of the unknown officials, a stern-faced man in his 50s, opened a thick folder containing documents that Elena couldn't see, but suspected related to her background and recent activities. Dr. Vasquez, I'm Agent Robert Hayes from the Defense Security Service. I'm investigating possible security breaches related to the Meridian Project. Elena felt the familiar chill of government scrutiny, but kept her voice steady. Agent Hayes, how can I help with your investigation? Let's start with your propulsion system modifications. Our independent analysis suggests that the combustion instabilities that initiated Tuesday's cascade failure were the result of deliberate design choices rather than engineering errors. Elena had prepared for this accusation. Agent Hayes, all complex propulsion systems involve design compromises. The modifications I made were intended to optimize performance under normal operating conditions. The extreme stress conditions of intercontinental flight revealed limitations that weren't apparent during ground testing. Dr. Thompson leaned forward, his expression mixing professional curiosity with personal disappointment. Elena, I've reviewed your calculations dozens of times. The mathematical models are brilliant, but they include assumptions that specifically create instability under the exact conditions we encountered during testing. Elena realized that the technical team had identified the precise mechanisms of her sabotage, even if they couldn't prove malicious intent. She needed to provide explanations that acknowledged the flaws while maintaining plausible deniability. Dr. Thompson, theoretical models always involve simplifying assumptions. I may have overestimated the system's ability to handle thermal variations under extreme acceleration. The calculations looked solid on paper, but didn't account for real-world stress interactions. Agent Hayes consulted his folder, removing a document that made Elena's blood freeze. It was a printout of communications intercepts, fragments of encrypted messages that suggested coordination between multiple individuals involved in technical modifications across various project components. Dr. Vasquez, we've detected patterns of communication between project personnel that suggest possible coordination of technical modifications. Are you familiar with these communication patterns? Elena stared at the document, recognizing coded phrases from the resistance network's coordination efforts. The government had been monitoring encrypted communications and had detected enough activity to suggest organized sabotage without being able to decrypt the actual content. I communicate with colleagues across multiple project areas, Elena replied carefully. Technical integration requires coordination between propulsion, guidance, materials, and communications specialists. Indeed. But these communication patterns suggest coordination of technical modifications that would create systematic vulnerabilities rather than improved performance. Dr. Mitchell activated a wall display showing technical analysis that took Elena's breath away. The presentation revealed the network's sabotage efforts in devastating detail: propulsion modifications that created combustion instability, materials changes that caused structural failure under specific stress conditions, guidance errors that amplified propulsion problems, communications failures that prevented system recovery. Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Mitchell said, this analysis shows that Tuesday's failure resulted from coordinated sabotage by multiple project personnel. Each individual modification was subtle enough to escape detection, but the combined effects created systematic vulnerability that guaranteed catastrophic failure under operational conditions. Elena found herself genuinely impressed by the analysis, while terrified by its implications. The government had identified the resistance network's methods, even if they couldn't prove individual culpability. This level of coordination, Agent Hayes continued, suggests an organized effort to sabotage critical defense programs. The participants would need sophisticated technical knowledge and access to classified information across multiple project areas. Elena maintained silence while calculating her rapidly diminishing options. Confession would lead to prosecution and imprisonment, but might protect other network members. Continued denial might preserve her freedom if evidence remained circumstantial, but would leave her vulnerable to enhanced surveillance and eventual discovery. Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Thompson said quietly, I need you to understand something. The Meridian Project isn't just about weapons development. The propulsion technologies we're creating have applications for peaceful space exploration, satellite deployment, and scientific research. Sabotaging these systems doesn't just prevent weapons development, it also delays innovations that could benefit humanity. Elena felt the weight of that argument. The same technologies that could power intercontinental weapons could also enable missions to Mars, asteroid mining operations, and deep space exploration. Her sabotage had prevented military applications, but also delayed peaceful innovations that might advance human civilization. Dr. Thompson, she replied carefully, I believe that scientific advancement requires careful consideration of applications and consequences. Technology that could enable peaceful exploration could also enable unprecedented destruction. Agent Hayes leaned back in his chair, studying Elena with the calculating expression of someone evaluating a chess opponent. Dr. Vasquez, let me be direct. We have evidence of systematic sabotage across multiple defense programs. We have communication patterns suggesting coordination between technical personnel. We have your background in classified aerospace projects that ended badly due to concerns about military applications. Elena realized that Agent Hayes was building a comprehensive case while giving her an opportunity to cooperate rather than face formal prosecution. The government wanted her to confess and provide information about other network members in exchange for reduced charges. What we don't have, Agent Hayes continued, is direct proof that you personally introduced sabotage into propulsion systems. The technical modifications could theoretically result from engineering errors rather than malicious intent. Elena understood the implicit offer: confession and cooperation in exchange for treatment as a whistleblower rather than a saboteur. But accepting would require betraying colleagues who had trusted her with their careers and freedom. Agent Hayes, Elena said finally, I designed propulsion systems to the best of my ability using established engineering principles. If those systems failed under stress conditions, that represents engineering challenges rather than sabotage. The interrogation continued for another 2 hours, with officials presenting evidence and Elena providing technical explanations that acknowledged problems while denying criminal intent. The session ended without resolution. Insufficient evidence for prosecution, but too much suspicion for continued classified access. Elena returned to her office to find David Kim waiting with barely concealed anxiety. The young engineer had obviously spent the past 2 days wondering whether the resistance network had been exposed and whether his involvement would be discovered. "Elena," David said quietly, "there are rumors that some people might be transferred off the project due to security concerns. Is that something we should be worried about?" Elena recognized David's coded question as concern about network security and potential arrests. She needed to provide reassurance without revealing information that could be monitored by enhanced surveillance. "David, complex projects sometimes require personnel changes as requirements evolve. The important thing is maintaining professional integrity regardless of assignment changes." David nodded, understanding that Elena was advising caution and preparation for possible security actions against network members. The resistance had succeeded in destroying the Meridian prototype, but success had come at the cost of exposing their methods to government counterintelligence efforts. That evening, Elena received a final message on her encrypted phone. "Phase completed successfully. Network dispersing for security. Thank you for your service to conscience over coercion. The next phase belongs to others." Elena realized that the resistance network was dissolving to prevent further exposure, leaving individual members to face consequences alone. The coordinated sabotage campaign had achieved its objective, demonstrating that weapons programs could be undermined by their own technical personnel, but continuing operations would risk exposure and prosecution of everyone involved. She deleted the message and destroyed the encrypted phone, erasing the last connection to the network that had allowed her to fight against forced participation in weapons development. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the government implemented enhanced security measures designed to prevent future sabotage. Elena had won a significant battle by helping to destroy the Meridian Project, but the war between individual conscience and institutional coercion would continue. The government would adapt its recruitment and security methods, while new resistance networks would develop new techniques for undermining weapons programs. As she drove home through the desert darkness, Elena reflected on the price of victory. The Meridian Project was dead, but her career in aerospace engineering was probably finished. Dr. Mitchell's suspicions would follow her to any future employment requiring security clearance, effectively ending her ability to work on advanced propulsion systems. But for the first time in years, Elena felt at peace with her choices. She had used her expertise to prevent the development of weapons that could have destabilized global security, even at the cost of her professional future. The resistance network had demonstrated that conscience could prevail over coercion when people were willing to risk everything for their principles. The stars overhead were the same ones that had inspired her original interest in aerospace engineering, back when she dreamed of building engines that would carry human exploration to distant worlds. Those dreams had been corrupted by military applications and weapons development. But perhaps future engineers would find ways to pursue peaceful applications without being trapped in systems that demanded moral compromise. Elena had fought her war and won her battle. Now it was time to discover what kind of peace was possible for someone who had chosen conscience over career, principle over pragmatism, and integrity over institutional pressure. 6 months after the Meridian Project's spectacular failure, Elena stood in a converted aircraft hangar outside Tucson, surrounded by the controlled chaos of a startup aerospace company that bore no resemblance to the sterile government facilities where she'd spent most of her career. Stellar Dynamics occupied 50,000 square feet of former military space, filled with 3D printers, computer workstations, test stands, and the kind of improvisational engineering that happened when brilliant people had limited budgets but unlimited imagination. Dr. Vasquez, called Maya Rodriguez, the company's 28-year-old founder and CEO, "Could you take a look at these combustion efficiency calculations? We're trying to optimize fuel consumption for the Mars cargo mission, and your propulsion expertise could save us months of development time. Elena had joined Stellar Dynamics 3 months earlier, after government security reviews had effectively blacklisted her from classified defense work. The transition from secret weapons development to open source space exploration represented more than just a career change. It was a return to the idealistic engineering that had originally drawn her to aerospace research. Maya had founded Stellar Dynamics with a simple mission: develop affordable propulsion systems for peaceful space exploration using open source designs that couldn't be weaponized because they were publicly available to everyone. The company's business model involved commercial satellite launches, scientific mission support, and cargo delivery to planned lunar and Mars colonies. Elena approached Maya's workstation, where multiple monitors displayed orbital mechanics calculations and propulsion system designs that made her pulse quicken with familiar excitement. These weren't weapons. They were tools for human expansion into the solar system, technologies that would enable peaceful exploration rather than strategic destruction. What kind of mission profile are you optimizing for? Elena asked, studying the calculations with professional interest. 6-month cargo runs to Mars during optimal transfer windows. The client wants to deliver construction materials and life support equipment for the first permanent colony. We need propulsion systems that are efficient enough for commercial profitability, but robust enough for deep space operations. Elena felt the same surge of purpose she'd experienced years earlier when designing engines for scientific missions. This was engineering applied to humanity's greatest adventure, the expansion of civilization beyond Earth's gravity. The challenge is balancing fuel efficiency against thrust requirements, Elena observed. Mars transfer orbits require sustained acceleration over weeks, rather than the brief high-thrust phases needed for Earth orbit operations. Maya nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Plus, we need systems that can be maintained and repaired during multi-month voyages. Military specifications assume perfect manufacturing and unlimited replacement parts. Commercial space operations require much more robust and repairable designs. Elena spent the afternoon immersed in calculations that reminded her why she'd become an aerospace engineer. The mathematical challenges were identical to those she'd faced in weapons development, but the objectives were completely different. Instead of optimizing kill efficiency, she was optimizing exploration capability. Instead of hiding innovations behind classification barriers, she was contributing to open-source designs that would be shared with the global engineering community. Elena, said Dr. James Chen, Maya's technical advisor and former NASA propulsion specialist, I wanted to talk to you about the Aurora project. We've got an opportunity that might interest you. Dr. Chen led Elena to a secure conference room where Maya was consulting with representatives from the United Nations Space Development Initiative. The meeting involved discussion of propulsion systems for an international Mars colony mission, a civilian project that would demonstrate peaceful cooperation in space exploration. Dr. Vasquez, said Dr. Amanda Foster from the UN Space Initiative, we've reviewed your background and recent work with Stellar Dynamics. Your expertise in advanced propulsion systems could be exactly what we need for the Aurora project. Elena listened as Dr. Foster outlined an ambitious international mission to establish a permanent research base on Mars. The project involved collaboration between 12 nations, with propulsion systems provided by private companies like Stellar Dynamics rather than government aerospace contractors. The political implications are significant, Dr. Foster continued. The Aurora project would demonstrate that space exploration can be an alternative to military competition. Nations that might otherwise compete through weapons development could instead collaborate through peaceful exploration. Elena felt a surge of excitement mixed with wariness. The Aurora project represented everything she'd hoped aerospace engineering could accomplish: international cooperation, peaceful exploration, scientific advancement. But her experience with the Prometheus and Meridian projects had taught her that good intentions could be corrupted by political realities. What kind of security restrictions would be involved? Elena asked. Maya answered before Dr. Foster could respond. None. The Aurora project uses exclusively open-source designs that are published in international engineering journals. No classification, no export restrictions, no security clearances. Pure civilian engineering for peaceful purposes. Elena realized that Maya had deliberately structured the project to avoid the security apparatus that had corrupted her previous work. By making all designs publicly available, there could be no secret military applications or hidden weapons development. Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Foster said, your background includes experience with both civilian and military aerospace projects. You understand how engineering can be applied to different purposes. The Aurora project specifically seeks people who can ensure that space exploration remains peaceful rather than becoming another domain for military competition. Elena spent the following week reviewing Aurora project specifications and technical requirements. The mission profile was breathtakingly ambitious. A sustained cargo delivery system that would support a permanent Mars colony for decades. The propulsion requirements exceeded anything she'd worked on previously, pushing the boundaries of chemical rocket technology. But the most appealing aspect was the project's structure. Every design would be published in academic journals, every innovation shared with the global engineering community, every component manufactured by international consortiums that prevented any single nation from controlling the technology. Elena made her decision during a Friday afternoon meeting with Maya and Dr. Chen. I'd like to join the Aurora project team. The technical challenges are exactly the kind of work I originally wanted to do in aerospace engineering. Maya smiled with obvious satisfaction. Elena, your experience with complex propulsion systems could accelerate our development timeline by years. Plus, your background gives you credibility with international space agencies that might be skeptical of a young startup company. Over the following months, Elena threw herself into Aurora project development with enthusiasm she hadn't felt since her graduate school days. The work involved the same mathematical challenges and engineering creativity as weapons development, but applied to objectives that expanded human capability rather than human destruction. The propulsion systems she designed would power cargo ships that delivered equipment for scientific research stations, life support systems for permanent colonies, and communication arrays that would connect Mars to Earth. Every innovation would be published immediately, preventing secret military applications while accelerating global space development. Dr. Vasquez, Maya said during a December project review, your combustion efficiency improvements could reduce Mars transfer costs by 40%. That's the difference between Mars colonies being affordable for middle-class families versus restricted to government programs and billionaires. Elena realized that her work was directly enabling the democratization of space exploration. The propulsion systems she was developing would make Mars accessible to scientists, artists, entrepreneurs, and ordinary people seeking new frontiers rather than limiting space access to military personnel and wealthy elites. The Aurora project's first major test came 8 months after Elena joined the team. An unmanned cargo ship powered by engines she'd designed launched from French Guiana, carrying supplies for the International Space Station. But unlike previous missions, this cargo ship would continue to Mars after the ISS delivery, testing propulsion systems for eventual colony support missions. Elena watched the launch from Stellar Dynamics' mission control room, surrounded by colleagues who understood that they were witnessing the beginning of humanity's expansion into the solar system. The rocket climbed smoothly through Earth's atmosphere, its engines performing exactly as her calculations had predicted. Telemetry nominal, announced the mission director. Propulsion systems performing within design parameters. We are go for trans-Mars injection. Elena felt tears forming as she watched her engines carry human cargo toward Mars. This was what aerospace engineering was supposed to accomplish, expanding human civilization's reach rather than expanding its capacity for destruction. 6 months later, the cargo ship arrived at Mars and successfully deployed its payload of construction equipment and life support systems. The mission's success validated Elena's propulsion designs while demonstrating that peaceful space exploration could be accomplished through international cooperation rather than military competition. Elena, Maya said during the post-mission celebration, your engines just opened the space frontier to everyone. The Aurora project has proven that we can reach Mars affordably, sustainably, and peacefully. Elena looked around the celebration, seeing engineers and scientists who had dedicated their careers to expanding human capability rather than human destruction. These people represented the future of aerospace engineering, professionals who chose exploration over exploitation, cooperation over competition, peace over power. 2 years after the Meridian project's failure, Elena received an unexpected visitor at Stellar Dynamics. Dr. James Patterson, her former mentor, arrived unannounced and asked for a private conversation about opportunities in government aerospace research. Elena, Dr. Patterson said as they walked among Stellar Dynamics open-source development stations, I've been following your work with the Aurora project. The propulsion innovations you've developed could have significant applications for defense programs. Elena felt familiar ice forming in her stomach. James, the Aurora project is specifically designed for peaceful space exploration. All our innovations are published in open literature to prevent military applications. That's exactly what makes them valuable. Open-source designs can be adapted more easily than classified systems. Your Mars propulsion technology could be modified for strategic applications with relatively minor changes. Elena realized that even her attempt to escape weapons development by working on peaceful exploration couldn't prevent military adaptation of her innovations. Any propulsion technology sophisticated enough for Mars missions would also be sophisticated enough for weapons applications. James, I'm not interested in adapting peaceful technologies for military purposes. I've found work that allows me to advance human civilization without contributing to human destruction. Dr. Patterson studied the bustling activity around them. Engineers designing systems for lunar mining operations, scientists planning missions to Jupiter's moons, programmers developing autonomous navigation for asteroid exploration missions. Elena, you've created something remarkable here. But you should understand that other nations are studying your open-source designs and adapting them for their own military programs. Your peaceful innovations are being weaponized whether you participate or not. Elena considered the implications of Dr. Patterson's warning. By publishing her designs openly, she had indeed made them available to any nation or organization seeking to develop advanced propulsion systems. The same openness that prevented secret weapons development also enabled rapid military adaptation by hostile nations. That's the price of progress, James. If we only develop technology in secret, we limit its benefits to whoever controls the secrets. Open source development means accepting that innovations can be misused, but also ensuring that they can be used for peaceful purposes by everyone. Dr. Patterson nodded slowly, understanding that Elena had made peace with the fundamental paradox of technological development. Any innovation sophisticated enough to be valuable would also be sophisticated enough to be dangerous. As he prepared to leave, Dr. Patterson offered one final observation. Elena, you've found a way to pursue advanced engineering without directly contributing to weapons development. But the larger question remains. How do we ensure that human technological advancement serves peaceful purposes rather than destructive ones? Elena looked out at the desert sky where her engines were carrying cargo toward Mars, enabling human expansion into the solar system. We do it by choosing to work on projects that expand human capability rather than human destruction. One engineer at a time, one project at a time, one choice at a time. 3 years after walking away from classified weapons development, Elena had found her answer to the moral challenges of aerospace engineering. She couldn't prevent the weaponization of technology, but she could ensure that her expertise served peaceful exploration rather than strategic destruction. The stars overhead held the same dreams that had originally inspired her career, but now she was helping to make those dreams accessible to everyone rather than restricted to military applications. It wasn't a perfect solution to the problem of dual-use technology, but it was a choice she could live with. Elena Vasquez had finally found her way home to the stars. 5 years after the Aurora project's first successful Mars mission, Elena stood before an audience of engineering students at Arizona State University, delivering the annual Aerospace Ethics Lecture that had become her signature contribution to aerospace education. The auditorium was packed with young faces that reminded her of herself decades earlier, brilliant, idealistic, convinced that technology could solve any problem. Engineering, Elena began, is fundamentally about choice. Every design decision, every technical innovation, every application of scientific knowledge represents a choice about what kind of future we want to create. She clicked through slides showing the progression of her career, from peaceful aerospace research to weapons development to sabotage to open-source space exploration. The students listened with fascination as she described the ethical challenges that most engineers would face, but few professors were willing to discuss honestly. A student raised her hand with a question Elena had expected. "Dr. Vasquez, what do you do when you're forced to work on projects that conflict with your values? When refusing means losing your career or facing legal consequences?" Elena smiled, recognizing her younger self in the question. "That's the most important choice any engineer will face. When I was confronted with that decision, I first tried to hide from it, then tried to subvert it, and finally found a way to transcend it by finding work that aligned with my values." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But I also learned that individual choices, while important, aren't sufficient. We need institutional changes that allow engineers to pursue peaceful applications without being coerced into military projects." Elena displayed her final slide, showing statistics from the past 5 years of open-source aerospace development. Since the Aurora project had proven the viability of collaborative space exploration, more than 40 nations had participated in peaceful space missions. Private companies had developed affordable access to lunar resources. International cooperation in space had reduced tensions on Earth by providing alternatives to military competition. The Aurora project succeeded because it was designed from the beginning to serve human expansion rather than human destruction, Elena concluded. Open source development, international collaboration, and civilian applications created a framework where aerospace innovation served peaceful purposes. After the lecture, Elena was approached by Dr. Maya Rodriguez, who had expanded Stellar Dynamics into one of the world's leading space exploration companies. Maya's success had inspired dozens of other startups focused on peaceful aerospace applications, creating an industry that competed through innovation rather than through weapons development. "Elena," Maya said, "I wanted you to know that the Aurora project's success has opened funding for the next phase: permanent colonies on Mars, mining operations in the asteroid belt, and scientific missions to the outer planets. Your propulsion designs are literally opening the solar system to human civilization." Elena felt a sense of satisfaction that had been missing during her years in classified weapons development. Her expertise was being used to expand human capability rather than human destruction, to create opportunities rather than eliminate opponents, to explore rather than to threaten. That evening, Elena returned to her desert workshop where she continued developing propulsion concepts for future space missions. Her current project involved designing engines for missions to Saturn's moons, where subsurface oceans might harbor life beyond Earth. Her phone buzzed with a message from David Kim, who had left defense contracting to join a startup developing clean energy satellites. Elena, the orbital power platform prototype achieved stable operation today. Your propulsion system modifications allowed perfect orbital positioning. We're now generating 50 megawatts of clean energy for the Texas grid. Elena smiled, remembering the young engineer who had struggled with the ethics of weapons development. David had found his own path to meaningful work, using aerospace technology to address climate change rather than military threats. Another message came from Dr. Sarah Chen, her former partner in the Meridian Sabotage Network. Sarah had transitioned to developing advanced materials for space construction, creating alloys that could withstand the harsh environment of interplanetary space while remaining completely unsuitable for weapons applications. The lunar construction platform is operational, Sarah's message read. Your engine designs delivered our materials perfectly. We're now building the first permanent structures on another world. Elena realized that the Resistance Network had evolved into something more positive. A community of engineers who had found ways to apply their expertise to peaceful exploration rather than strategic destruction. The skills they had once used for sabotage were now used for construction, expansion, and discovery. As she worked on her Saturn mission calculations, Elena reflected on the choices that had brought her to this point. The path from weapons development to space exploration hadn't been direct or easy, but it had led to work that honored both her technical expertise and her ethical principles. Her phone buzzed one final time with a message from an unknown number. Dr. Vasquez, I'm an aerospace engineering student who attended your lecture today. Your story inspired me to focus my career on space exploration rather than defense applications. Thank you for showing me that engineers can choose to expand human capability rather than human destruction. Elena smiled, understanding that her true legacy wouldn't be the specific engines she designed, but the example she provided for future engineers facing similar ethical choices. Every student who chose exploration over exploitation, cooperation over competition, peace over power, would continue the work of ensuring that human technological advancement served constructive rather than destructive purposes. Outside her workshop window, the Arizona desert stretched toward distant mountains under a sky filled with stars that held the dreams of human civilization. Some of those stars were already within reach thanks to the engines Elena had designed, and others awaited future innovations from engineers who would choose to reach for them rather than use them as targets. Elena Vasquez had transformed from a weapon designer to a space pioneer, from someone who created instruments of destruction to someone who built tools for exploration. Her journey from the Prometheus project to the Aurora project represented more than a career change. It was a demonstration that individual conscience could prevail over institutional coercion when people were willing to risk everything for their principles. The stars overhead were calling, and Elena's engines were ready to answer. The future belonged to those who chose to reach for it together rather than fight over it alone. In her workshop, surrounded by calculations for missions to distant worlds, Elena continued the work of expanding human civilization beyond Earth's gravity well. Every equation brought humanity closer to becoming a multi-planetary species. Every innovation opened new frontiers for exploration and discovery. The silent mechanic had found her voice, and it was calling humanity home to the stars. I want to tell you about two paths that aerospace engineering can take, Elena continued. The first path focuses on strategic advantage, building systems that allow one nation or organization to dominate others through technological superiority. The second path focuses on human capability, building systems that expand what our species can accomplish together. Elena displayed images from the Aurora project's latest missions: cargo ships delivering equipment for lunar mining operations, passenger vehicles carrying scientists to Mars research stations, and construction platforms assembling solar power satellites that provided clean energy to Earth. The technical challenges are identical regardless of application, she explained. Designing propulsion systems for intercontinental missiles requires the same mathematical skills as designing engines for Mars exploration. The difference lies not in the engineering complexity, but in the objectives we choose to pursue. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most. And where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.